Okay.
Baruch Shechianu v'giyanu lazman hazeh. The limud of HSukkah, Befrat Yeshiva Sukkah. It's a very gishmaken limud. It's a very negeya limud. And Kedarkena will try to go Bez Hashem through the sugya halacha l'maisa, and to try to see what's all the gishmak ezach. This is also there's a revach betzidoi in this sugya. Person learns this sugya. Comes the time of he spends time with his family. It's a good time. You have good gishmak shailas. Where is he spending all his time? In the sukkah. Gishmak shailas about the sukkah. Let's try Bez Hashem this year to go through these sukkahs, learn them klur, Bez Hashem. The first obviously is the first siman over here. The first is the kavanas. That's especially in these days, everything goes after the kavanas. Over here it says in the Shulchan Aruch, in Tav Reish Chav Hei, B'sukkahs teishvu shivas yamim. Ki b'sukkahs shavti el b'nei Yisrael. Hey manone kovid kifim behem l'chbal yakim shraga emesh. What's the addition over here? That b'sukkahs you have to sit in the 7 days. Comes again the Mishabura. And the Mishabura over here, he tells us something which is extremely important. Many of us know this, and many of us are aware of this, at least on the first night of Pesach, of Sukkot. Don't realize that this is Negeya Mamish all the days. Over here, Mishabura, he says, Kozva achreinim yikhavim b'shivasa shetzivanu HaKadosh Baruch Hu leishei b'sukkah. Grainim say that you have to have kavanah for the sitting in the sukkah. Why? Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim. It says in the Torah, Leman Yedu Der Seichem Ki B'Sukkos of Shafti Es Bnei Yisrael when left Mitzrayim. It's a zeichel also for the Anani HaKavod, and it seems to be, says the Mishabura, that you have to have both kavanahs. The kavanah for Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Hainu zeichel that when we left Mitzrayim, Rebbeinu Shalom protect us, we sat in sukkahs, and it's also a zeichel. Excuse me. It's also a zeicher for the Anani HaKavod. And kavana, in addition to the fact that a kavana is very important, but the Taz in Simentav Reish Mem explains what's the reason why the Torah gave a p'tur of mitzdayer. Okay, we know it's because Teish V'kein Taduru, but what's the reason why the Torah gave this p'tur of mitzdayer when a person is bitzar? He's parted from the mitzvah of sukkah. And Taz says, because when a person sits in the sukkah, he has to have the da'at. He has to realize he's sitting in the Sel Sedem Nusa. He has to realize that the Rebbeinu Shalom took him out of Mitzrayim and protects him in all matzavim. He has to remember the Anani HaKavod and that nothing harm a Yid and that a Yid is safe wherever he is. Says the Taz, when a Yid is tired, he won't be able to have a yishav adas to concentrate, and he won't be able to think about leman yedu darasechem. It's the ikra mitzvah. The ikra mitzvah, when a person goes into the sukkah, and be thinking, what does he have to think? He has to think Anani HaKavod. He has to think Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim. The Rebbeinu Shalom sat us in these sukkahs. We see how chashuv it is. Most people on the first night of sukkahs, they tell the olam that. You have to have kavanah, Anani HaKavod. Some people have a sign on the sukkah. What people don't realize is that this is a mitzvah. Kavanah is something that's required all 7 days. The entire time that a person's in the sukkah, when he goes into the sukkah, he always has to have kavanah. A person goes into the sukkah to eat. He goes to be matayah. Shivas yamim. What does the Mishnah say in sukkah? He makes a house into a rai, and his bias is the ikr. His sukkah is the ikr. His house is a rai, and his sukkah becomes his bias. Which means that a person, anytime he goes into the sukkah and he wants to fulfill the mitzvah, he has to have the kavanah, the Anani HaKavod, the Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim. Okay, Isa comes along, the Mishnah Berurah over here, and he adds one thing very important, and this is all 7 days. Comes along the Mishnah Berurah, and he says, "Kol zeh lotzeis yidei mitzvah ketikuna." He says that even though there's a shita Bach that learns that even though normally we know that kavanah and mitzvah, the kavanas of the Torah, the extra kavanas, aren't necessarily ma'akiv. But here the Torah says, "Mefurish l'man yedu darasechem." So therefore the Bach learns that this thought of Mitzrayim and Anani HaKavod, that's ma'akiv, because the Torah went out of its way to say it. The Mishabura comes to argue on that and says, no, it's not ma'akif, it's the right thing to do. The right thing to do is to have kavana, nanei hakovid, and zeichel yetzias mitzrayim. It says the Mishabura, but if you want to be yotze al kapanim the mitzvah, b'diavad kol shekivin lotzei, as long as you had the regular good old-fashioned kavana of siman samech, mitzvah shrichas kavana, Eibshteke hasten since the Rebbeinu Shalom told us to sit in sukkah. That's why we sit in the sukkah. Now, I know the one thing as the Mishabura, it seems yes to be ma'akiv, nanei hakovid, not ma'akiv. Yetzias Mitzrayim, not ma'akiv. What's ma'akiv? The kavana that I'm doing the mitzvah l'shem olam. The shame that the Rebbeinu Shalom told me to do it because the Eibshteke hasten. That's why I'm doing the mitzvah. That seems to be something that's ma'akiv. So the Mishabura over here is a startling Mishabura. Mishabura is saying that a person that walks in the sukkah, and now I bishlam on the first night, so people say this. Bishlam on the first night, so people say this. But on the rest of the days of sukkah, people say this. Now I'm being asked over here, what about the bracha? First of all, I'll answer that not on all 7 days does he make a bracha. Not every time you go into a sukkah do you make a bracha. Let's say a person is sitting there and he's just having shahakals. It's definitely not making a bracha. Number one. Number two, I don't know, the Mishabura bracha, a new thing. The Mishabura also had brachas. Why does the Mishabura say that kol shekivin, kol, that if he had the kavana lotzeis the mitzvah b'diavad? Mishabura's mashma that if he didn't have that kavana, the lotzeis the mitzvah, he didn't have kavana to do the lotzeis the mitzvah.
I'm sure they're quite around. I have to put the Mishabura text on the screen because I think, if you don't mind, the oil has to see it. So can we put that the Tarfish Chavhei?
Sivkat Nav.
Sivkat Nav, yeah. I'm sorry. Okay, apologize. It'll come up in a second, so why don't you continue?
The Mishabura's lashon is habediavad yotzei kol shekivin lotzeis. As long as you have the kavana lotzeis the mitzvah, so then you're yotze the mitzvah. The obvious implication in the Mishabura is that if he didn't have kavana yotze the mitzvah, he went in without thinking. It sounds like for the Mishabura he's not yotze. Now the Olam's asking, but doesn't he make a bracha? First of all, Laida, unfortunately, some people they make a bracha and they don't think. You know, like we say, how long does it take to make a bracha? Well, it depends how tall you are. Right? So it depends how tall you are. So not everybody who makes a bracha thinks. That's number one. And number two, not every time he goes into a sukkah does he make a bracha. The Maisa, you could learn that the Mishabura is a little bit lavdafka. And that what the Mishabura means is that the other ones are not ma'akiv and only hakovid because stamazay we paskin they're not ma'akiv. And here we hold that kol kivin lotzeis is yotze b'diavad, and the assumption is he's kivin lotzeis. Why? Because of the bracha, etc. But the Mishabura seems to clearly imply that one has to go out of his way. Mishabura clearly seems to imply that one has to go out of his way to have kavana to be yotze the mitzvah. And if he doesn't have it's a mitzvah, he's not yotze b'diavad. It's mamash a mitzvah lefarsim, this Mishabura. It's probably a mitzvah lefarsim every Mishabura. But this Mishabura is certainly a mitzvah lefarsim because there are many people that go into the sukkah. On the first night, most people have kavana. But later on, if many people go to the sukkah, they sit there. And if you're not having kavana, you're not being yotze. As I state Mishabura. Now, the
move it down, please. Move it down so I can see the Mishabura inside, please. Scroll down. I'm sorry. Before the Rav goes off, can you just reread the part that
right before Sivkat and Beis, Kosev Achreinim, Yikavim B'Shiva Shetivanu HaKadosh Baruch Hu Leisha B'Sukkah Zeichel Tzias Mitzrayim. The Gam Zeichel of it that Hashem protected us. Holds that that's the extra hider of the mitzvah. If you want to be Makayim the mitzvah in the most mahudadik way, so you have to have the kavanah on the Zeichel Tzias Mitzrayim and on the Anani HaKavod. But b'diavad, if you want to be Yotze, says the Mishabura, b'diavad to be Yotze, kol shekivin lotzeis levad, as long as you have kavanah to be Yotze the mitzvah, so then you're okay. The implication in the Mishabura is if I did not have kavanah for lotzeis the mitzvah, I'm just doing it. And I'm not doing it for the purpose of the mitzvah. I'm just I go into the sukkah to sit because everybody's in there chilling, I think they say. So I go in also. And they didn't have kavanah. So then according to the Mishabura, you're not getting the mitzvah of sukkah. And it would be a terrible shud. He's 7 days sitting in there. He's there all the time. The family's there. Everybody's there. All he had to do was a millisecond beforehand. I'm doing this because Hashem told us to do it. And I want to be yotze to the mitzvah. Says the Mishabura, if he doesn't think that, he's not yotze to the mitzvah. Now there's a big chiddush l'chayim in this. We know that there's a Yerushalmi that the Chayodam, the way the Chayodam learns this Yushami, and Mishabur in a Bir Allah and Simon Samech, that what happens, a person, a Yid, he wakes up in the morning, it can happen, Rabbi Isai, he puts on his tefillin, and he's thinking about this, he's thinking about that, he has to say Tefillah Saderech by the time he comes back. And as he's taking off the tefillin, he realizes the one thing he didn't think about is his tefillin. I'd say the mitzvah of tefillin. Now, there are kavanas in tefillin. The Shulchan Aruch brings that you should have the kavanas. Same with tzitzis. Let's say a Yid put on a tzitzis, and he didn't think that he wants to be yotzei the mitzvah of tzitzis. Is he yotzei the mitzvah of tzitzis? Tefillin, tzitzis, etc. The Chayodam learns in the Yushai, a very big chiddush, and that's how he learns this. That's how the Chayodam learns. The Yushalmi, if I'm not mistaken, is the HaShulchan brings the Yushalmi, the Chayodam brings the Yushalmi. They all bring the Yushalmi. That the Yushalmi seems to say that when a person does an action like kibbud ava'im, which is let's talk about paying a worker. Let's say a person pays a worker, and he doesn't, think I'm doing this to be yotzei the mitzvah of baltalin and b'yoyim atitin scharai. He pays his worker. So there, if you didn't have kavanah, so then you're probably not getting a mitzvah, because mitzvah tzrichas kavanah certainly the basis, and you didn't think about being makayim the mitzvah. And why are you paying your worker? Esav also pays his workers. So you're not getting the mitzvah. Masha Kane says the Chayodam v'das Yushalmi. Let's say you have something that an action that you do screams kavana. Where do you have a case of an action that you do screams kavana? Tefillin. Why are you wearing these black boxes on your hand? Here's this guy, he's on an airplane, he's wearing these black boxes. He's either blowing up the place or he's doing the mitzvah of tefillin. So in such a case, the only time that we say that mitzvah tzrichas kavana is when there's no reason to believe that the action that he's doing is being done l'shem mitzvah. So then we say that in order to infuse this action with the kedusha of a mitzvah, you have to have the kavana. But let's say I have an action which it screams kavana, tefillin. Why are you tefillin? So then we say the stam action screams kavana, and therefore even without having had kavana, you yotzei. Now it's not lechatchila. Lechatchila is supposed to have kavana. As I state in the Chayodam, the Mishabur brings it down. You should know that HaRav argues on this. Derech Hagav, he learns the exact opposite. He learns that the Yushalmi is talking about a person that fakir, he's not sure if he had kavana. So that Yushalmi says chazaka that you did have kavana, but let's say you knew b'vadai that you didn't have kavana, like in our case at the tefillin, then HaRav learns it wouldn't work. But the Mishabur brings the Chayodam, and Yushalmi seems to learn halacha l'maisa something. Person benched and he didn't have kavana. So we say Yaitse did the have the fidus Chayodam. Why? Because why are you reading all these words? It must be to do the mitzvah. You could declare Rabbi Isai by kibbud ava'im. I mean, most of us who are soicha, our parents, I'm sure they call our parents every day and whatnot. So you call your mother. Right before you call your mother, if you think for a millisecond, I'm doing this because it's to do the Ratzon Hashem, keep it of aim to get the mitzvah, keep it up. So then the next entire conversation is a mitzvah. If not, Esav also calls his mother. Well, at least he calls his father. But then, so what is it about? Maybe it's just basic taif. Who says it's a mitzvah? Maybe he's just a decent person. I don't know if calling a mother every day screams kavana that you have the chayodam. I don't know. Maybe by us, since we're, from a Yidden, and we all went to Gan and to Cheder, and they droned into our cups, keep it avein, keep it avein, keep it avein. And maybe because today the world has no respect for elders and certainly parents, so maybe one could be mechadish that if anybody's still by calling his parents, then he's either one of two things. He's either a Jew or a Muslim. But I don't know. The Maisa.
That's an umdana. He's giving us an umdana that.
He said it's basically like an umdana zah that the Maisa shrais kavana. Shrais kavana. I don't know if by kibbud avein the Maisa shrais kavana anymore. I don't know. Maybe today, yes. Don't know.
In my chug, the shaila is when the kid calls
I sat on a plane.
Ask for money. If he asks for money, he's mekayim mitzvah kibbud avana.
I'm sorry.
The kid calls and asks for money. He's mekayim the mitzvah kibbud av.
Oh, but vaday nisht. I sat on a plane, and there was a child that they came on late, and the kid was running, and the father said to the child, "V'zeh lashon habayisai, hold on to your chair." The father said to the child, he said, "Well, listen, what could we do? We were going to miss our flight." So the father turned, I don't I'm in the middle of a conversation, you realize. The father turns to the child and says, what? So let me understand. You're blaming me because we couldn't buy you whatever you wanted to buy the kid. You're going to blame me? So the child looks straight into his father and says, of course I blame you. It's all your fault. So how do I say? I don't know. So when I call my mother, I guess I'm the only person left that's either normal, or maybe the mind just screams kavana or mitzvah. I don't know. But it's not a raya. Maybe I'm just still a decent person and we're still decent human beings. I don't know. But anyways, us. So now you get a kasha on the Mishnah Berurah. What's the Mishnah Berurah saying? That if you have the kavana that I want to be yotzei the mitzvah of sukkah, I'm yotzei. If you don't have the kavana being mitzvah of yotzei mitzvah sukkah, you're not being yotzei. What happened to the Chai Adam? The Bina himself brings the Chai Adam. So what happened to the Chai Adam? Why don't we say, why is it that you're going into the sukkah? Rabbi say most people eat in their houses, and where do people sleep? They sleep in their houses. So why don't we say that Maisa screams kavana? And then why is the Mishnah Berurah say that if you had kavana, lot say you're yotzei, mashma the Mishnah Berurah. If you didn't have kavana, you're not yotzei. Why? I am yotzei. That's in fact that I'm sitting in a sukkah is either one of two things. Either I'm a mashegana or I'm doing the mitzvah of sukkah. So why don't we say that this mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah screams kavana? There's two ways that you can go over here. One way you could go over here is that maybe that's what Mishnah Berurah means. Mishnah Berurah means, if you're a makaven, let's say, levad, you're yotzei. And this is called that you're makaven because the mice is kavana, but it's very difficult in the lashon of the Mishnah Berurah. Another thing maybe you could learn that it's a shtickle shaila, but maybe you could learn that the yesh laden, when we know, I'm going to say which sounds like a steer to the Torah, but I'll explain in a moment. We know that, Lamaisa, people do sit outside and people do eat outside. And it's a very nice, it's very nice to sit outside and eat outside and whatnot. So maybe that action, it's not in the middle of the winter, Rabbi say, and it's also not in the dead of the summer when it's boiling hot. So maybe that action, you can't say when a person is sitting, we know there's a concept, especially some people have houses, which are cabanas and whatnot, porches. So maybe it doesn't scream kavana in the same way we spoke about. We just spoke about how a person fill in, that screams kavana. Where's it tzitzis, that screams kavana. Why are you wearing those strings? But Mashain came, maybe sitting and eating outside in an airy area doesn't scream kavana. Now you can tell me that and therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah, you must have kavana. If you don't have kavana, you're not yotzei. And you wouldn't have over here the Chai Adam. You could ask, but the Torah say the first not like that? Because we saw the Torah in the beginning of the Simon, the Mishnah Berurah brings the Torah. The Torah says that why is it that the Eibishter made us sit in sukkahs now and not Pesach? So says the Torah. Doesn't that make more sense, right? When we came out of Mitzrayim, we sat in sukkahs. Says the Torah, because since Dafka now, the weather's getting colder. It's beginning to get cold. So it's not so normal. So therefore, it's going to be more nicker, says the Torah. Mashenkin, if it would be back then, says the Torah, it wouldn't be so nicker. Maybe you're standing outside. So that's the exact opposite of what I just said. You see that when we're sitting outside in the time of Sukkot, it's slightly colder, and therefore it's in nicker that we're doing it l'shem mitzvah. I don't know if that's a kasha. The Torah is just explaining why they chose this time over that time. Why did they choose the time of Sukkot as opposed to the time of Pesach? So that the Torah says because it would be more nicker than the time of Pesach. But by side else, it's not winter, and therefore it is still normal for people to sit outside. And therefore, even though you'll say, "What do you mean by sit outside?" But I don't sit in a sukkah. And okay, but that already you realize. And some people they're going to have sukkah as a part of their house and whatnot. That you could say that maybe that's a shot in the Mishnah Berurah. That the Mishnah Berurah is not going to have kavana. The mice sitting in a sukkah doesn't scream kavana, and even the Chai Adam is going to agree that you're not yotzei. But don't forget, Rabbi say, the Chai Adam himself says, "Lichatchili ni kavana." Even if you would have the Chai Adam, and even if you'll be miyashiv this Mishnah Berurah, you'll say, "The Mishnah Berurah brings this in a prima godim in brackets." What in Mishnah Berurah has a sefer shartzion. Why doesn't he bring this statement and then on the bottom in the shartzion write godim? Here, if you look at the Mishnah Berurah, you'll see he brings down that if you didn't have kavana to be yotzei, as long as kavana to be yotzei, you're yotzei. Otherwise, you're not yotzei. And then he writes prima godim brackets. Why need to pre-megadim in the Shartzian downstairs. He has a sefer called the Shartzian. So we have a cloud from the back of Kamenetsky that sometimes the Bishop brings something and he's not sure. He has a suffix if it's yalacha, not lalacha, and therefore he brings it because he wants you to know this chashav acher and said it, but he wasn't conveying halacha in his sefer. His sefer, the Makar is in the Shartzian. So if that would be true, then maybe you could say that really the holds, like we said, like the Chayodam, and that you say because it screams kavanah. And why does it scream kavanah? Because going in the into the box in the middle of the start of the winter, that also screams kavanah. Mishabura brought it over here because he wants you to know this chashav acher and said it. Even if that would be true, which it's a bit of a doichik in the Mishabura, one thing is clear: it's certainly lechatchila to have kavanah. Even the Chayadam said, "V'oidar HaShulchan doesn't hold of the Chayadam," and over here it's garnish pashit that you have the Chayadam, and therefore all 7 days, not just the first night, you make sure when you go into Sukkah, you should have the kavanah of the Naneh Covenant, you should have the kavanah of Zeichel Tzis Mitzrayim, and you should certainly have the kavanah that you want to be yait to the mitzvah, because otherwise it could be even be the Eved, you're not yait say. That's first of all. Now, there's another problem. In a different Bir Halacha, also in Siman Samech. This Bir Halacha, ready? Excuse me, everybody say.
Let's put the Bir Halacha on, please. I assume it's in this. HaRav's getting ready. I assume it's Siman Samach. We can put the Siman Samach Bir Halacha on. Yes, Rizar.
I just wanted you all to feel his feeling. You know that cold. You know when a person has a cold and he's congested. I wanted you to all feel it. So I'm trying to bring it out. I hope
it's a chutzlar. It's a chutzlar stick of cold, obviously. Siman Samach, the YESHIVAS. Okay, let's put out that Bir Halacha, please. The set was sent to us a few minutes ago. Rabbis Shapiro and let's see if it was copied to you. I'll send it out to you. Anyway, Siman Samach, please put on Siman Samach. And I'm sending you the Alizai set now.
So over here we have another issue. Comes again, the Shleima Zaman Orbach, and this is in the first tshuva in Mincha Shleima, a very, very statistic tshuva. Over here, we have a new problem. The problem is that there's a Bir Halacha in Siman Samech, which is a most phenomenal chiddush. The Bir Halacha says, what happens? You have a person, he has Kallus, and he wasn't mekaven. And we had mitzvah tzrichas kavana, and certainly by deraises, we all mitzvah tzrichas kavana, and he wasn't mekaven. Okay, I told you the Chayodam. Let's the Chayodam. Or he put on tefillin, he had no kavana, or whatever the case will be. So now, comes again the Bir Halacha with a reason chiddush. Says the Bir Halacha that since the Torah said you have to be matal onto Dalit canvas, and you're not getting the mitzvah. Says the Bir Halacha that if, unbelievable chiddush, but if you're wearing Dalit canvas without getting the mitzvah, if you're wearing Dalit canvas without getting the mitzvah, so then it's as if you have Dalit canvas without tzitzis. So a kama that the Torah wants you to wear the tzitzis in order to get the mitzvah, and you're not getting the mitzvah. So now you're wearing Dalit canvas in a way where you're not getting the mitzvah. The Bir Halacha, oy bazai, that's called that you're vatal the mitzvahs say, and it's as if you're wearing Dalit canvas without tzitzis. As I state in the Bir Halacha, the big chiddush. Big chiddush. Rule the kima mitzvah. The Torah said to wear tzitzis and be. He understands the Torah said wear tzitzis and get a kiyama mitzvah. It's like comment that you're wearing tzitzis, wearing Dalit canvas, and not getting a kiyama mitzvah. So you're being mevatel. You're being mevatel the mitzvah. If you're being mevatel the mitzvah, so then your tzitzis are not tuing oif what they're supposed to oif. You should get a mitzvah. So therefore, it says if you're wearing Dalit canvas without tzitzis. comes again the guy Shlomo Zalman, and he says, "Oh, oy bazai hu adin sukkah." A person is sitting in the sukkah, and he's not thinking, "I'm doing this l'shem mitzvah." And the way we just came out, it could be stam das won't work, and they have to actually think it. So now he's sitting in the sukkah and not having kavanah. So now, what's he doing? He's eating in the sukkah without getting the mitzvah. What did the Torah say? The Torah said, eat in the sukkah, get the mitzvah of eating in the sukkah. Sleep in the sukkah, get the mitzvah of sleeping in the sukkah. So now what are you doing? You're eating in the sukkah in a way where you're not getting the mitzvah. The kavanah is ma'akev. So now that's called that you're eating outside the sukkah. Because your sukkah, you're being mevatel the mitzvah say of sukkah. A zayvi, if you have a person that if he would eat outside the sukkah, he's being mevatel mitzvah sukkah. So too, if you're eating in the sukkah in a way where you're not getting the mitzvah, you're being mevatel the mitzvah sukkah. Azay says Shlomo Zalman, Shlomo Zalman says this is even more pashit than what Bir Halacha says. The Bir Halacha was talking about tzitzis. That here, that safe. I put the Torah said put strings onto the beged, and now take this dalit kanfis and put strings on. Now, when I wear it, I get a mitzvah. If you're not having kavanah, you don't get it. But I did what the Torah said. Here, what did the Torah say? The Torah said to eat in a sukkah. What was the vart? The Torah didn't say stam eat. They don't want you eating in a sukkah. The Torah told you that you should eat to be mekayim the mitzvah of sukkah. That's agufa. That is the mitzvah of sukkah. The eating in the sukkah is the mitzvah. So Bishlama, when it came to tzitzis, so now it's a daled canvas that at least has the tzura of tzitzis. But here, that is exactly the Torah said. The Torah said, eat in the sukkah in order to be mekayim mitzvah sukkah. If I'm not being mekayim mitzvah sukkah because mitzvah tzrichas kavana, so then I'm not eating. I'm eating outside the sukkah. I'm being mevatel mitzvah say. This is a riesige chiddush, but at least we do hold of this. We don't hold of this. Bar, make sure you have kavana, because like you saw, the Taz says that's the entire purpose of the mitzvah is the man yedu dar seichem, and I think it's a mitzvah farce in this because it's not just the first night, and people don't know this. So that Rabbi Yisai is part one. That's the issue. Kavana. Then he shouts before I go weiter.
So before anybody goes in to go to sleep at night, you have to have a specific kavanah and sheina l'man yedu dar seichem. Is that what the Rav is saying?
100%. Before I go to sleep in the sukkah every night, I have a little sign on the sukkah wall, and it says me the 3 kavanas. That's the 3 kavanas. It says on the top l'man yedu dar seichem, and then it says zeichel anon erkoved, zeichel tzitz m'rayim, and it says and kavana lot says the mitzvah that kasher tziva. I think that's what the sign says. And every time I come into the mitzvah, I just look at it for 1 second. The truth is, it becomes a part of your routine after a while.
Ellen wants to know why you can't make some sort of a tanai, and at what point can you make such a tanai? Why isn't it similar to Berachos Torah where it's a mitzvah nemshachas?
Yeah, it could be. I could definitely hear a little bit. First of all, I don't think it's a limit schos on what we spoke about. It might be an eitzah for the future, meaning the fact that, the Zayda gets up at the and announces to everyone should have kavanah. I don't think anybody realizes that should work for the next 7 days. So I'm not sure how much of a limit schus it is, but if somebody would ask me, would it work if I get up on night 1 and say, from now, whenever I walk into the sukkah, I have kavanah that I want to be yotzei the mitzvah, bein da nanei kovid, bein tzitz mitzrayim, bein that Hashem told us kasher tziva. Maybe that would work. Maybe that would work because it's a short amount of time. It's not a long amount of time. Therefore, you could say it's al das rishayna oisa, but it's a chiddush. Certainly, once a day, there's definitely a big makom to be makel. That if a person would come in after davening every morning, and he would say that from this point here, anytime he comes into this pashtus, that would be al das rishayna ayin taisis and zvachim and dav base. But again, to say that it's schos, I don't know if it would work because most people don't realize this. They just think, the first night. That's how people are.
Why doesn't the Bangad of Ram that says if you go to shul on Rosh because you want here to keep shayfer in the morning and you totally forgot 5 hours later you yitzal das rishayna? Why should it be different than that?
But that's all within 1 day. Number 1, and number 2, the ikar shel IYUNIM is shayfer. That's why the Shulchan Aruch gets siyat d'shmaya and everything. The Shulchan Aruch says every siman of Shulchan Aruch has some siyat d'shmaya. Why it's there? Where's the siman about shayfer? Tafkuf pevav says the shlok because that's the takfoy shel yoyim. Strength of the day is the shayfer. So Yid wakes up Rosh Hashanah. What's the one thing every Yid is thinking about Rosh Hashanah? Shayfer, 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 shayfer. Right? But by sukkah, no, let's say you're thinking about a chalamoyed trip sometimes. So I would hear once a day. I could hear it. I could definitely hear it, and then it would be taka congruent to the Magen Avraham by shofar.
And so I don't know. I just had how far to take this. So when the day changes at seis, I have to reignite the kavanah that I had.
No, I doubt it. I think that's Rishayna Oik says something that lasts for the whole day.
Till you go to sleep, basically.
Basically, yeah. It's all in the Balabatichkeit of where is it that he's still misyaches to that original das. So that's everybody say that's part one. Now, excuse me. So let's go to a different topic for a moment. Okay, the Shulchan Aruch starts here, Tafresh Lamites. That's our simon. The Shulchan Aruch says, Keitzad mitzvahs yeshivas sukkah. He says, Ye oichel v'shoise yoshen u'metayel. Derech agav, what does it mean metayel? How do you metayel in a sukkah? What does it mean metayel? So the lashon metalala, it might be the Aramaic word. The lashon metalala means shade. The person wants to just relax. He wants shade. So then that's where you go. During this, you go into the sukkah to relax. I mean, obviously to learn, if you're able to learn, the Gemara brings a stira. If you can learn in the sukkah, not learn in the sukkah, the Gemara says, HaBiyuni. It depends if he's Ian, is it an easy sukkah, is it Bekiyas sukkah, is he listening to a shir? If it's something easy to do, so then definitely you should do it in the sukkah. If it's something that he won't be able to do, okay, Shvi came to do it says, look, I don't always go to the base medrash. I stay in my house and learn, right? In the Haim, sometimes it's hard to learn. So therefore, it'd be normal that he would go in such a case. Go to the base medrash if he can't concentrate because there's people in the sukkah, push it that he's allowed to learn in the sukkah. But if he could build himself a separate area in the sukkah or a separate sukkah, halavai, then he should learn in the sukkah. Akopanim says the Shulchan Aruch, Darbai Shivas Yamim, Kederach Shudar Bebeisai, Shayimai Shana, and Kol Shivas Yamim. He makes the oisa adam as arai and a sukkah keva. How do you do that? Kalim noim, everything nice. You bring into the sukkah. Okay. Klei achila, and says the Rama after the achila, you're going keteris and kairis chutz sukkah. Okay. First of all, I want to give you something to think about. You know, it's very difficult to talk about the side of the mitzvah of sukkah. Which mitzvah Shem, that's what we'll be really focusing on. Legabe Teshvu, legabe what's considered a mitzdayer, when there's pturim. It's very hard to not, when you're discussing when is there yesachiv, not bring in these concepts of mitzdayer. So I know the Olam hasn't started learning yet mitzdayer, but you all know that the best idea is that a mitzdayer is going to be pater from sukkah. And this is something which in mitzvah Shem, we're going to have to learn properly. It's some quite a shocking thought because that lefum tzara agra. We know that adarabba, tsar enhances the mitzvah. The tsar makes the mitzvah into a better mitzvah, kivyachol, agra. And tofei ein beis sif yud, we know there's no ptur tsar in other mitzvahs. I'll give you an example. Let's say a person ate in the sukkah. All of a sudden, it was a downpour. He finished eating and it started a downpour, and he didn't bench yet. Where does he bench? Do we say mitzvah in a sukkah? Very nice. But mitzdayer is not pater from Birkas Hamazon. So the B'kur Yankov, of course not. There's no patur of mitzdayer in any other mitzvah. He has to bench in the sukkah. In that case, he would have to bench in the sukkah. Yes, actually bench in the sukkah. Why? Because there's no patur mitzdayer. And in Tofayin Beis, if you had, it talks about a person with the Dalet Kaises, which we were zeicha to speak about. It says that Rabbi Yaina had a headache all the way from Pesach all the way to Shavuos. Why? Because there's no p'tur of mitzdayer when it comes to other mitzvahs. Okay? The Mishabur over there, Dan's, what happened to being derech chayrin? It's not so chayristic. Sure. Okay, and this is something mitzvah Shem we're going to try to talk about, and we'll try to get the klolim and under when we talk about mitzdayer. But I want to think about something. Over here it says that for 7 days, his house is the arai, and there are eitzes, but let's say the case was that he finished eating legamre, and he was already holding by benching, which means he wouldn't be allowed now to go and eat until he benches. Let's say wash my machreinim. But we're going to talk about this in Mitzvah Hashem. What I want him to think of is something very interesting. Lamaisa, 7 days he makes his house into a rai, but he does have a house. It's not the pshat that he doesn't have a house. He has a house. It's just that his house becomes awful, and his sukkah becomes his ikar. What's nafkamina? Nafkamina is like this. We're going to talk more about the of mitzvah patim sukkah, but I want you to think more about the chiyuv for a minute of sukkah in this teishu came to do. At what point, I'm not going to discuss now what makes a person mitzvah, because that you have to look before. But I want you to think about something. At what point can a person say, I'm mitzvah, and therefore my sukkah? What do I mean? If I say, what does it mean? It means that, we have to probably figure out, and that we'll see, the Rishonim say this, we have to figure out at what point you leave your house. In order for you to say that I have to leave my sukkah, you have to say the sukkah is your ikar house. At what point would you leave your house if there's a leak in your house? So now, how would you don that? It's very interesting. Do I don, at what point would I leave my house? I would leave my living room and walk into a different room. I go finish my meal in the kitchen. Let's say you're sitting in the Shabbos table in the living room, and there's some type of a leak that comes in. At what point would you leave your living room and go into the kitchen? I think most of us would leave pretty quickly. So then it would come out that mitzvah is quite kuladik. Right? At what point would I leave my living room? Or does it mean at what point would I leave my house and go to my neighbor's house? Most of us, that would take a very big downpour before we would do such a thing. So I look around, it opens up the sugya a little bit for us. I saw in the HaRav in the chapter, he says a gewaldige hagdara, which really, if you think about it, it's kimat Shulchan Aruch, this hagdara. He says, at what point your house is a rai, your sukkah is the kev. At what point would you leave your house to go to some arai garage machsan that you have? You have your house, and right now there's a problem in your house. At what point would you leave your house to go? Let's say it's raining in my house, there's a leak in my house. At what point would you leave that to go to a garage? In Eretz Yisrael, we say a machsan. At what point would you go from your house to the machsan and sleep there? Let's say it's really cold in your bedroom. In the machsan, in the garage, you have their heater, whatever. It's not a Geshmaka house, the machsan. At what point would you leave your Geshmaka house to go to your not Geshmaka house? That's how you have to ban what point I'm chayiv in sukkah. I'm throwing this to the oilam now because you haven't learned yet the sukkah of mitzvah. I want you to think about this. That's what we're trying to figure out when it comes to sukkah. At what point my house becomes my tuffle. My sukkah is my ikar. You have to view the sukkah the way you would view your house. And you have to view your house the way you would view your sukkah. Right? And now, based on that, a lot of the shilas will have, there'll be enough kaminas based on that. I'll give you another example, by side. Just on things to think about. Just based on this lashon of Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch says, YESHIVAS, SUKKAH, Oichel, Shoysa, Yoshin. Derech Agav. Are you chayiv to sleep in a sukkah? You should know there's no Mishnah that says that you're chayiv to sleep in a sukkah. It says on those 7 days you eat there, you shaisa. It doesn't say sleep there. The only thing is there's about 10 Mishnayos that all talk about every single halacha in sukkah, always about hayoshin, tachas habita, cotton, legabe yoshan, sukkah daf yud dalid. Chav Beis, Mamish over and over again always talks about a yoshan. Explains the Bikkur Yankiv based on Rashi that the ikar mitzvah is really yashan. What's the reason why the ikar mitzvah is yashan in a sukkah? Because dafka, the Mishnah said that you have to do achilas keva in a sukkah, but arai to be outside a sukkah. Arai is outside sukkah. But by yashan, says the Gemara in HaRav, there is no arai. So that's why it's the ikar mitzvah sleeping in a sukkah. There's no arai when it comes to sleeping. So therefore, if I care, that's why when the Mishnah wants to point out that these 7 days you do your achilas keva in the sukkah and arai outside the sukkah, it had to say it by achila, couldn't say it by yashan, because there is no such thing as a sheinas keva, as a sheinas arai. And there, I think maybe under seconds there might be a makom to be makel, but even an arai of 50 seconds and up, it has to be already inside the sukkah. So therefore, Avadi chayiv to sleep in the sukkah. We're going to talk about if there's
Well,
limits.
that's 60 seconds. Did I hear 60 seconds correctly?
4 seconds, but we're going to talk about this when we learn yeshiva, the Shena. But Lamaisa, over here, listen to Lashon Shulchan Aruch. He's dar b'sukkah kol shiva, bein b'yoyim, bein b'layla, kederach shudar b'beisei b'shayis hashana. The way he lives in his house. That's what he has to view. He has to view always the way he lives in his house. Excuse me, please. But I want to explain something which is very important to the understanding of the sugya. Let's say a person, he's a very, very large person. He's a great yid. And all he has is a sukkah of Zayin al Zayin. Could he say, I'm mitzvah patim in sukkah? Again, I know the oil is not into. I'm trying to get the Haggadah first of the chiyuvim of sukkah. Could he say, I'm a mitzvah patim in sukkah? There's no bigger tsar. He's 7 by 7 feet. This guy. How can he sleep in a 7 by 7 sukkah? It's Shaila, the Trumas Adeshem, in Simon Sadi Beis asks, and he says a big site. He says there's no p'tur. He says the only time there's a p'tur of mitzvah patim sukkah. This is the way I understand the Trumas Adeshem. He says at comment that the Torah says a size for a sukkah could be 7 on 7, so then you don't have a p'tur. And he says because a man shalamol when he sleeps at night he'll curl up. He'll curl up his body. So therefore, and in Israel, so he'll sleep in the sukkah, and his legs will be sticking out of the sukkah. Nishkefelich. You could line up 10 kids like that, Rabbi. But the Trumas Adeshen, the Taz says this is a davar pella. How could it be? This is This is the biggest tsar that a person could possibly have. So how could it be? But the Rabbi, here you see a tremendous insight, and I think Rosh Hashanah has said also that when we say mitzvah in the sukkah, it has to be something which is exterior to the sukkah. Something maybe that the like it talks about when there was schach falling in, or maybe there's a smell, or maybe there's rain or whatever. But let's say a person gets up and he says, I can't sleep in a sukkah. Why? I just can't sleep outside. I can't. That's the roof. Are you going to say mitzvah patim in a sukkah? Of course not. That is the mitzvah. The mitzvah is that for these 7 days, you make sure that you go into Kallus. That's not going to be as comfortable. Avada the mitzvah sukkah is not going to be. You're going outside into a house that normally isn't a right type of a house, and you have to be mitziaches to it like it's a kevetik house. So if the mitzias of sukkah, the hilchas sukkah, is what's making you uncomfortable, it's too small for you, it's too cramped for you, you don't like sleeping outside, you don't feel comfortable outside, you can't say mitzvah patim in sukkah. The style patim sukkah is only when there's something exterior to that. Mitzad the sukkah, I don't have a problem. The nafkamina baisai is that a person has to start realizing it's going to be very difficult for him to build a sukkah over here, and he's going to have to go and build a sukkah down the block, and it's going to be annoying, etc. Should he say mitzvah patim sukkah? It's a galechta, Rabbi Isai. Said some sefer, of course you can't say in such a case mitzvah patim sukkah. At the fum sarah agro. Once I'll be in the sukkah, mitzad the sukkah is not the problem. That's external to the sukkah. And this is a very important havana, Rabbi Isai, as you start these sukkahs. I'll let you think about this. We're going to come back to this. But again, very important to think about. For example, Moshe has a take a tshuva, which we'll talk about. Moshe has a tshuva where he discusses the heter Holchei Drachim. Moshe in the sukkah of Holchei Drachim, and Moshe says he wants to say a chiddush. The only time we say Holchei Drachim, we know there's a p'tur of Holchei Drachim, is pater from a sukkah, and Moshe says it has to be something very, very necessary, either a mitzvah or maybe business or stam to go into Yule. Moshe doesn't seem to say that's enough of a heter of Holchei Drachim pater from the mitzvah. What's the pshat? I'm allowed to go on a vacation. I'm not jailed in my house. More so. Shlomo Zalman brings the Yisayid V'Sharish Avoda. Yisayid V'Sharish Avoda brings down that any second the person is outside the sukkah is being mevatel mitzvah saseh. What? What do you mean? Any second I'm out of the effective Shlomo Zalman? Any second I'm out of the sukkah mevatel mitzvah saseh? Why is that? Hooray! It's not Teshuva came to do it to make this into a jail cell. So Shlomo Zalman says Yisayid. Shlomo Zalman says, and again, I want to think about these things. I'm not being conveyed here, halacha, that's really more in the sugya. I want you to think about this. Shlomo Zalman says he said that since if a person were to be told, listen, if you stay in this house, every second you stay in this house, you get $1 million. How quickly would he leave? How quickly would he leave? Every second you stay in this house, you're getting $1,000, even $1,000. How quickly would you leave? He's going to start, every second you stay in the house, get $10. Okay, that's a lot of money, Rabbi Say. That's a minute he's going to get $600, Rabbi Say. That's a lot of money, $3,600 an hour. I don't know, the highest lawyers in the city don't get that, Rabbi Say. So, says Shlomo, that's the point. So when Steve Shavayda says any second you're not in the sukkah, you're being mevatel mitzvah to say, you know why? What happened to Teishrei King Taduru? I shouldn't be jailed and bound and mail and whatnot. Yeah, but even you live with a cheshbon also. And that's where Ramesha says the same idea. You can't just say, go on a tiyul, and it's normal for a person to go on a tiyul, and there's no, you can't make me jailed in my sukkah, and I'll be mitzvah put them in a sukkah if I have to be in jail. Yes, but you have to realize this is your ikar house, and this is a house which gives you mitzvahs, and this is a house. So now you have to cheshbon it differently. Now, I want you to realize that it's not pashut. Everything I just said to you is not pashut. But these are the thoughts I want them thinking as they're going into the sugya. The first thing you have to think, Rabbi Say, at what point can a person say, I'm at star pater min sukkah? If I were to get out of this problem in my house by going to a different bedroom, by getting out of this problem by going to a neighbor, or by going to a garage. The Bachacha says it's got to be by going to a garage, because you have to be messiah to your sukkah, that this is my ikar bias. So at what point would I go to my tuffle bias, my house? Another thing, at what point can a person, say mitzvah? It's very easy to just say mitzvah, but don't forget, Rabbi Say, the whole mitzvah sukkah has within it star. You're going outside, everybody becomes all congested from sukkahs. A lot of people don't like sleeping outside. It's a little bit uncomfortable. It's not the same comfort. You have to realize that. So that's not going to go into mitzvah. That's the etzim chefza of the mitzvah. That's the going into Kallus after Yom Kippur that will get us our kapara, etc. So now, at what point can a person say this? He has to don with a different reason right now. He has to have a different cheshbon when he's donning. He can never say that, well, I have to build a sukkah all the way down the block, and that's going to be very annoying for me. But now, once you'll be in the sukkah, so then you're a tremendous amount of the cells of demnus and then on their covered. So you would have to build a sukkah some seifer. Now, how far do I take it? The Ramesha takes it that you can't even go on a tiyul and pater yourself by saying you're whole chedrachim and eat outside the sukkah. And Shlomo Zalman goes further, bringing the Sefer Sherish Avoda and saying that if you're out of the sukkah even for a second, you're being mevatel mitzvah to say, because even in a house, if they would offer me $1,000, I would stay. Now, all these things are not pashut, but they're what you have to think about. Let me be Messiah. Excuse me. Sorry. Kallus cautious, everybody say. Let me be Messiah. Over here, a tremendous nafkamina in the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah talks over here about, there's a Gemara. The Gemara says about not bringing in certain types of kalim into your sukkah. It says that certain types of kalim don't belong in the sukkah. The shaila is, which kalim you're supposed to bring only your kalim noyim? Shaila is what a clay oichel you leave outside the sukkah. There's two pshatim in the Rishonim. Some Rishonim learn that it means, as you're seeing over here in the Mishnah Berurah, right over here in the beginning of Sif Aleph. Some Rishonim learn it means that you're not supposed to bring pots, pans, and things that you wouldn't bring to the table into the, because it's pasnish, it's not something you would bring into your living room table, pots, pans, and whatnot. The pot that you cooked in, especially in those days, it was like a cauldron or who knows what. Not supposed to bring it into the sukkah. That's one pshat in the Rishonim, and that's a gather of a teishrei kain tadura. And the Rishonim say also it's a shalaitei mitzvahs bezuyas alav. Have this bezayin. Others say it means after you eat, you shouldn't have after you eat the kalim, the leftover shmut kalim. You shouldn't leave them in the. That's the mice of the minig is to try to be makbid on both. You don't bring pots into the sukkah, and you also don't bring into the sukkah kalim. That you don't leave the plates and all the shmutz in the sukkah. You clean up. And as I state the Mishnah Berurah, Mishnah Berurah says, he says, Lashon zeh mashma l'chayra de b'shas achila gam kederis mutter. He says in the Shulchan Aruch it's mashma you can bring pots, and the only problem is that leaving the plates on the table. But it's mashma you could bring in pots, and that says Mishnah Berurah. But the oilim is nizer even on pots. That's the minik. The minik is that we're chayshish and that we don't bring pots into the sukkah. Mishnah Berurah goes on. He says maybe even the Shulchan Aruch holds like this. Okay, it smells like this. The shaila becomes. What happens? You have somebody, especially over here in Eretz Yisrael. He lives on the first floor, let's say, second floor, and his roof. He's got a sukkah, or the other way, he lives on the fifth floor, and he's got a downstairs in the chutzner, in the courtyard. He's got a sukkah, so he's going to have to travel 5 flights of stairs with bowls of soup, and be very difficult. Is there any heter for this person to bring his pot of soup into the sukkah? Is there any heter? So it seems to be that maybe there would be maybe to put a table outside the sukkah and put the pot outside, but it's not always so practical, especially if it's dark and whatnot. So, is there any eitzah ever for this person to bring his soup into the sukkah? So the truth is that really it's the minig Yisrael to be machmir, and that's the right thing. And I guess he should, if he could, build some type of a table outside the sukkah, because to walk down with 5 bowls, with 5 flights of stairs with 50 bowls is not a massive. Okay, but the shaz is there in the eitzah. Is that in many sukkahs, a person has what's called doifin akuma. I'm talking to Noilim of Talmidei Chachamim. You guys know what a doifin akuma is. You know that sometimes walls could move depending how you learn the sugya, and that that a lot of times you have a situation where the schach ends and there's no wall there, and now you have a puzzle schach, either because you have on top of your schach you have a merpeset or some type of a shlak or something, or like some people have in their diras, that there's a roof that comes over, and their schach starts after the roof. And then the wall they needed, though, was the wall from the dira. And that wall, as long as it's within Daled Amis, 6 feet, but as long as it's within Daled Amis, so then that's called the doifin. And we look at it, that the wall moves to the schach. That's the Halach Masina. Now, under that area, everybody knows you're not allowed to eat. The shaila is, we know you can't be Yitzim, it's a sukkah in that area. So now I can't bring my pot to the sukkah. Can I bring my pot to the doifin akuma? And somebody asked me this year, he said this is always an issue by him. He can't bring down bowls of soup and whatever. So he said, well, do is he'll lichatchila make a doifin akuma in his sukkah. Put the pot in the doifin akuma. Bekitzer, can I put the pot in the chelik of doifin akuma? So I saw a 3-way machlekes. I saw that the Bikur Yankiv and the Pischei Zuta, they say that if it's a wall, it's a doifin of the sukkah, and therefore it has kedusha, and therefore you still have this issue of the mitzvah's beziyus, and it's not proper to the mitzvah. However, they're machalik. They make a chilik like this. They say it depends. If you have 4 walls, so then you only need 3 walls. So then doifin akuma is halacha mashmi Sinai. The halacha was only said if you need it. They say, b'kai governor that I don't need it, not only don't I need it, I don't want it, because I want to be able to put my hand under there. So they want to say that if you have 4 walls, so then they want to say it would be mutter. Then I saw that say, no, it's aser b'kol loifin. You can never put pots, because saif, it's lemaisa, a mitzias. In the Balabatishkeit, it's a mitzias that this is mitzvah's bezuyas alav. You have in your sukkah a pot. So who cares if halachically it's not in the sukkah, but it goes past the Balabatishkeit. And then I saw the Stipler, he says the opposite. He says in b'kol loifin, it's always mutter, it's only a problem in the sukkah. 3 shitas. One shita says always mutter, even if you need it. One shita says it depends if you need the doifin akuma. and one sheet that says that it's always aser. Oh, what's lemaisa? Okay, so if there's an eitzah, you put a table out, you put it on a table outside the sukkah. I was thinking like this though. There's a tshuva from Rav Vosner. Sorry. Excuse me. The tshuva from Rav Vosner discussing muksa. There's a Mishnah Berurah that talks about, are you allowed to move pot? And the Mishnah Berurah says that our pot, says the Mishnah Berurah, it's a kli shemlach yeser because the function of a pot is to cook. But he says, but many times the pot is a graf shel rei. It's schmutzig dik and it's geferlich, and therefore you're allowed to move it. As I say, says Rav Vosner, maybe the Mishnah Berurah over there was talking about in those days when they had cheres pots. And cheres pots were all schmutzig dik, all ich and geferlich. But he says our pots today, he says, excuse me. He said, today, how schmutzig dik do our pots get? So, I was like, Rav Vosner over there in Hilchas Muksa, he has a chumrah. Over there, he has a chumrah. He's not sure if our pots get so schmutzig dik that they're considered a gashel ray. That means that they're all and then you can just move them. Because our metal pots, or even the crack pots, they're not all schmutzig dik like they used to have in the times of Chazal. So therefore, he's not chayshish that maybe it's chayshish that it's not so much a graf shel rei. You could take that far over here by sukkah and say the opposite. Maybe when is it that there was such a minig and such a strong minig not to bring pots into the sukkah because mitzvahs bezuyis, because in those days the pots were all schmutzig. But our pots are far from schmutzig dik. There's people sometimes that even bring pots to the table today. So I say that our pots might not be schmutzig dik, number one. And there's a tzad that under the doif and akuma is mutter anyways. Kallus said like that. So upon him, that would certainly be mitzvah. I told this person that under the doif and akuma with the metal pots, that zikr would be a mokim to be meiko. I just want to be messiah. I saw something interesting as you're learning the metayel. I saw the Piskei Tshuva in the beginning of our simon over here. He brings down that a person, a lot of times the gay in Eretz Yisrael, he has a sukkah which is on a porch, and there's an entrance that goes from living room to a bedroom. He says, just like in a shul, you shouldn't make a sukkah into a shul into a kapandaria and walk through. He says, so too a sukkah. You're not supposed to just make it into a kapandaria and just walk through and use it as a shortcut. To me, this is a tzarchi and gadol, because in a shul, by a shul, is that if the shortcut was there before the shul came, then you're allowed to continue using it as a shortcut. By every sukkah, that's the metzias. By every sukkah, the metzias is that the shortcut was there, and therefore it's going to be mutter. And adrabah, when you walk through, have kavana that you're in a sukkah and you'll get nacha mitzvah. Okay, Rabbi say.
Sorry,